All right, how's it going, everybody? This is Aaron the Pedantic. I'm joined here by my friends Prince of Nothing and Gelatinous Rube, aka Ash of Creativity, aka James Streisand, aka probably several other things and wrestler pseudonyms I'm not aware of. And we're here to talk about dungeon design. So, I guess one of y'all want to kick it off? I'm doing something real fast.
Oh, there we go.
There we go. Yeah. Okay, I got that. So first comment that I see is this for that Dungeon 23 thing? Not necessarily. I think that just dungeon design overall is just a topic that never gets old. It never expires. It's always useful. And because ultimately, as dungeon masters, we're always making them, right? And we can always talk about ways to make them better. So we have a few examples that we're going to go over. Maybe some good dungeon design, maybe some bad dungeon design, maybe some principles to be aware of. And I'm sure we're going to disagree here and there. I actually already know one of Prince's pet peeves that is one that I definitely don't share.
Okay, let's start by fighting immediately, and then if there's any
I mean, that is the ideal.
yes, we can be
Alternative
constructive.
for the stream was getting upset with you slaying some sacred cows. Why does it keep increasing my gain? What is
Well,
going
hit
on
me.
here?
Yeah. Oof. All right. Well, hit us, Aaron.
Okay. Well, so I don't have an example of that one right now to show necessarily because it was the one I was telling you about that it's on my other computer and I'm trying to locate it right now.
I might have it for you. Which one is it?
It's mine. So probably
it's your
not.
own adventure. Okay.
Yeah,
I've never checked that one out.
Yeah, it's got some things in there that I think would really not jive. Damn. So I'm gonna need a second to locate it. I didn't want to put off the starting time too much.
Oh, no problem. No, I'll try to fill the gap a little bit. Now, what I guess I just came off No Artpunk 2, which did is a dungeon design competition basically that I've taken to running annually. We did pretty well, 800 something, almost 900 downloads in a couple of days. Number one on itch.io under Artpunk, but also a pretty good score overall. So that was nice. But kind of part of this competition is the idea that when people design adventures, a lot of them kind of tend to go for the low-hanging fruit of new monsters, impressive looking treasure, maybe some weird items or weird ideas. And why not, right? It's fun, it's easy to do, that sort of stuff. But the sort of my approach to it is that essentially that is not the it's good, but it's kind of easy. It's ultimately dungeons are they're better not because of like any single component, but it's all about like the way you organize all of these different components, right? The way everything is structured, the way the map, all these different creatures, all these different treasures, all this stuff, how all of this sort of fits together. So that's my general approach, and I refer to the more structurally complex, even though they're a little bit more vanilla adventures of the good old days as my guiding light. So that's the general way I approach it.
I found it. Okay, you ready to roast me?
By all means, I was born ready.
Okay, it's okay. It's not that bad looking back at it again. I just remember how much of a pain in the ass it was at one point. That's the funny thing about adventures is that they can look fantastic on paper whenever you read it, even to yourself whenever you design it. But whenever you actually run people through it, it's like, oh, why did I not think of that?
Yeah, well, that's why you should play them. Yeah, totally.
That is why we should play them. Why? All right. It's not that. What the hell? Where is? I'm trying to find a way to bring it up.
If there's any one component of a module you can just sort of read as an indication of like, well, somebody's approach to writing that adventure, I do think it's the map. I believe in the oracular power of the map. Are you gonna pull it up?
I'm
Why don't you-
trying.
Maybe you can
Okay, there we
describe
go.
it to us.
There we
in,
go. No, I just had to get creative. All right, downloads, and there it is. Okay. Bingo. All right. Yeah, it didn't want me to do it unless I pulled it up in Chrome.
Damn
And
it!
it was
Aaron,
a
that's bad
PNG.
radio.
It is. I'm sorry. Okay.
I'm sure we'll survive.
There we go. All right. So this was the dungeon one of the dungeons that I did for the public game. People may recognize the stickers and things like that. I did it on Dungeon Map Doodler whenever it just came out. And so this is right here. This is the area that I knew just from a discussion that was had once that this is something that would Russell Prince's Jimmy's, the first floor.
Right. Yeah, it
Yes.
does rustle my jimmies. I'm very angry. But the question is, can you tell me why?
Symmetry.
Yes.
Yep. Symmetry and map design.
I do think so. Yeah. Yeah. Part of the I always refer back. I didn't pull that one up as an example of a great map, but I actually should have. Is I always go back to B1 In Search of the Unknown, right? And in B1, you have a great, fantastic opening with you're going to this this stronghold of these two former adventurers, Rogon and Zeligar, carved out of a hill. Right? You go through the a long hallway. There's two magic mouths, so you have the idea. Oh shit, they're supposed to be gone, but I'm actually facing them now. But it's like a fake out, and then you arrive at the site of a massacre, and there's 5 or 6 different directions you can go in immediately. And this entire map is like this sort of vast, sprawling labyrinth. It's very exciting, right? It really does feel like you're exploring this sort of underground place where the rules are not quite the same, and you're trying to get enough loot and escape with your lives intact. Right? It's very exciting, and I think as soon as you start using symmetry, it kind of takes away from that. You can work around this. I'm sure all these 6 tombs have like I see some of them have doors and others don't. I'm sure the content is a little bit different, but there is a sort of like a monotony to you've got this floor. There's 6 rooms. I believe that is a coffin in every room, right?
Right.
I mean, the encounters can still be kind of can be kind of exciting. This doesn't mean that like now, it's a 0 out of 10 or whatever. It can still be great, but I feel it's like it is a tool, and that's how you should view it. This is a tool at your disposal. This idea of an interesting map, and I would say it's an underestimated tool, even.
I see. Yeah. Well, I mean, so the very reason that I actually went with symmetry to begin with was because this right here over by the 3 is something that's out of place. Whenever you look at how it is. So actually by mapping it, you would say, hey, this looks like it's supposed to be symmetrical, but there's no door here. And, so you basically have a hidden room there's a mural there. There's some little receptacles where you can put in some gemstones that you can get off of get out of some of the coffins. Actually, they're embedded in the eyes of the skeletons is what it was. Putting them in the right place moves the wall out of the way. And then that's where you have the decent treasure, basically.
That's a good impulse, right?
Oh, so that's maybe an acceptable use of symmetry, perhaps, whenever it's used as a clue, or are you saying
yes? I would say so. They would. How they would handle that in earlier dungeons is some of the secret doors you would be able to. I think you did both of them, right? There's basically in my mind, right, and I'm sure there's other ways, but you have a couple of ways to telegraph that a secret door is present, right? Because you don't want it to be entirely random. I mean, I guess unless people are carrying a lot of elves or something, I can imagine that you leave it apart, but. Ideally, you want people to be able to, if they're good enough, they should be able to find it somehow, right? It shouldn't be completely random, unfindable. And one of those things is indeed you can use symmetry, or you can use if they start mapping, they notice that there's, say, an odd, if the entire map is filled in, but there's this odd dark space in the middle, that also, like, that can give it away as well. B1 in Search of the Unknown also does that. The other one is basically what you also described, is that, well, we're walking past this wall, but there's a mural there and there's strange indentations, right? That alone should get your players interested, and they should already be, even if it's not symmetrical, right? They should already be going like, hey, what is this? This is not there for no reason.
That is fair. That is fair. Just to add a little bit extra context there. How I said the wall moves, it actually moves downward. This is something I ended up adding later, was that if they search along here, which, by this point it's gone, this is a stairwell going down, then they can actually retrieve the gemstones from the wall, so that way they can still get that money, son. And then after they pull the gemstones out, it goes back up like it's supposed to. James, you have any thoughts?
That's good.
So with regards to symmetry, I think you guys have already pretty much summed up my opinions on it. I'm naturally hostile to it. Because I think it gives the players a little bit too much information in what is supposed to be a chaotic delve into the underworld. But besides that, it can, of course, be. I don't know if this comment has tripped me up, because I disagree with it by and large.
This one?
But yeah.
Oh, so I've done a video where that's one of the first things I started off with, was like, here's how you design a dungeon. What was it used for first? Go from there.
It's not either or. It kind of depends on whether you want. I think you can do both, right? I consider it more sophisticated if you design a map that's not right. What's the first map that you make as soon as you learn how to, quote unquote, Jackie a dungeon, right? Is you make a couple of boxes, and then you draw a couple of lines in between them, and put a couple of secret doors in there. It is more sophisticated to kind of make it look like a real structure. It's harder too. You still don't have to make it symmetrical, right? Even if it would be symmetrical in real life, you could have parts of it collapse. You can pull all sorts of tricks out of your sleeve. I think it's not mandatory, but it's not bad advice either. As long as you keep in mind that you are designing what is essentially a game map. Your goal is not to make it as realistic as possible, but if realism would add to it, then yeah, by all means.
Yeah, I'm basically the same way in balancing monster ecology. There's a certain point that, like, it goes into absolute absurdity, and I try to, like, stay just shy of that if possible, just to, like, keep it where it's wild enough that it's interesting, if that makes sense.
Oh yeah, I think this is another one where, and I'll let Ash. I want to hear Ash's take on this as well, but this is another one where
generally completely disagree. I swear, I have very well formed opinions on this, but I will let you finish asking the question first.
No, I was going to very quickly give my point. It's just that even with monster ecology, it's not either or, right? You could, depending on what you're going to do, you can decide to have a completely dreamlike ecology, or you can try to keep it sort of like what is it? You can try to make it like you go for that verisimilitude, right? Where it's almost like a sort of dungeon ecosystem that makes sense. What Gary Gygax would do is he would basically do both. You would have, and you see this in, I think it's called Caverns of Chokanth, and particularly in the Forgotten Temple of Tharizdun, WG4. You would have a mundane sort of ecology that would make sense, right? Tribes of humanoids, maybe a few like weird vermin, mold, all this shit. And then there is a second layer. In this first layer is kind of it's fantastic. I mean, hill giants don't exist in real life, but it's also sort of grounded in reality. And then he would have a second sort of far more supernatural sort of like tendril almost or overlay like intrude in that, right? And then it can get a lot wackier. But the idea is that there's a sort of transition thing going on, but it really depends on how well does it work with what the rest of what you're trying to do, I think. So take it away, Ash.
Yeah, so I wrote an article ages ago. What was it? April 30th, 2022, called Prevent Maps from Ruining Your Dungeons, because I was beset on all sides by the opinion that dungeon ecologies had to make sense. Like there had to be something for if a giant constrictor snake was present in the dungeon, there had to be things for it to eat. And if there was a dragon in the dungeon, again, there had to be things for it to eat. Hobgoblins, a lot of it just came down to things to, this creature type needs things to eat, or these people need places to sleep. I need to know where their chamber pots are. And I wrote this article in opposition because at the time the Broasar folks were saying that, and I agreed with them. I invented some of this language so that dungeons were defined by colliding ecologies with layers and insulated ecologies within. Like a dungeon could have a garrison of hobgoblins, a nest of hook horrors, a dragon's lair, and more, all being raided on occasion by drow from another subterranean locale, which were themselves warring with the pot of Abelis. They're all in turn subject to trade or harassment or other diplomatic or hostile interactions from wandering monsters and adventure parties. And you could duplicate these. You could remove them at will. You could add to them or modify them. It would be super easy, because I think the thing that screws people up with the dungeons is that they understand them as these 5-room lairs that used to be a tomb or used to be a temple, and that's wrong. A dungeon is a place of chaos which is connected to it is an outgrowth of the underworld, which happens to have some connection to the surface. That connection to the surface might be a forgotten temple, a forgotten keep, could be an abandoned mine that dug too deep and too greedy. That's fine, but its origin is the underworld, from which you could have any number of creatures spawn in. But people have this instinct that I have to map out every inch of the dungeon, and anything that is uncovered, or because everything has been written out and specified and identified as these are the hard boundaries of the dungeon, it interferes with their understanding that this is a place of chaos and connects to other regions or realms of the Underdark. There should be tunnels that go off into they're like, well, what, Mr. GM, what's down this way? Don't go down there. That's off the dungeon and it's some monster's lair, or off to some other dungeon or some other part of you're going into a new biome if you exit down this tunnel. And my recommendation in that article was basically to have mapped and unmapped regions of the dungeon. Regions that you said were so chaotic, so subject to change and destruction that there was no point in mapping them and could not be accurately mapped to begin with by the players. And that was an opportune chance to use the chase rules if you happen to have a monster chase the party around there. And whatever area they happen to end up in, provided they survive, is where the new mapped area begins. So my instinct when it comes to dungeon ecologies is to make them fantastical. They cannot be an insular ecology. They have to be colliding, competing ecology. It is cool if you come across a drow barracks and it has the drow and has the drider, which is like the basically a
half
drow
spider, cursed
half
by
spider,
Loth. Yeah.
Exactly. There's a couple of maybe a couple of cave ropers in there. That's cool and all, but I want to come across a party of orcs invading that area, and they have their own section carved out of the dungeon, and there's a couple of hill giants or whatever.
I kind of agree with what you said. I do think that you mentioned, what is it? What do the orcs eat, right? And in a way, right? You can you can make something like too realistic or too boring, not fantastical enough. It definitely needs that fantastic element. I do think that if you have when you try to make these ecologies, if you give it a little bit of thought, right, a little bit of like internal consistency, that helps the players, I guess, even like make certain decisions. I feel it almost enriches the game. And I've got an example of this. There was one of these contest entries, right, for No Arcpunk 2 was Paralamo Salt Mines by Trent Foster. And this was this, you had this sort of magical crack smuggling guild. It was fantasy meth, right? But there was this band of thieves, and they were operating from out of this abandoned mine and parts of that mine were overrun by monsters. There was an alchemist in there, all of this stuff. But they had a path in and a path out. They had a wharf. There was a timetable for when they would refine it inside the mine, and then they would ship it, right? So there was a sort of internal consistency to it that was all considered, and that in turn sort of gives room for players to consider something and infer it and go, wait a minute, like these guys are in here. They have to meet somewhere, or maybe they could ambush the couriers picking up the money every once in a while, right? I feel it sort of enriches the game, and if it and I'm not saying that you said this, but to sort of contrast that, if you make your adventures run entirely on a wizard did it, no internal consistency whatsoever, pure chaos, once again, every once in a while is perfectly fine. I encourage heartily the idea of like lower levels of a dungeon, pure chaos, right?
That's not where it's not just pure chaos. It's the idea of colliding ecologies. This is the barrier between the Pine Barrens and
no. That's fine. I agree. You should put that in there. But yeah, there's definitely a value, I think, in sort of considering like a little bit of internal consistency. Like it kind of adds to it in the same way that if you consider like, oh, this. Yeah, it might not have been like a definite place before, but it has a sort of like implied history to it. I also think that can kind of like enrich a dungeon.
It can. I just, like I said, I'm fighting against the instinct of people to map out every corner of the dungeon, and from there say, well, there's no room for a dragon to slip in here. And I think that instinct basically needs to be killed. If you from there say, aha, well, I know where the dragon has been coming from, and I know who's been feeding it gold, that can be fun, that can be interesting. It is not required for an interesting game. It can add to it. But the presence of the dragon competing with the giant constrictor snake, competing with the Aplis, competing with the drow is necessary for the interesting dungeon.
I do think so. I think this is sort of a matter of degree. You can it's the classic you go through the door and then there's a 10 by 10 foot room and there's a giant dragon in it or something. Yeah, right? How did it get there? What the fuck? And
Right.
Obviously it's okay if you can play fast and loose, right? You don't have to explain everything. A little bit of mystery goes a long way. But I think if you go on pure, if you disregard it entirely, then it becomes a sort of like funhouse, more like funhouse dungeon. Which I mean, it can be fun. It's in the name, but it's probably I don't think it's optimal. It can be good, but
I just think that stuff needs to be prioritized when it comes to layers, right?
yes,
But it's not the theme. But people keep mistaking this is the theme of the dungeon. It's like, no, the dungeon should not have an overall theme. Well, it can. I'll walk that back. But again, it's the idea that, well, it has to be here, here, and here that these monsters come through, and I only know of one entrance. And therefore, I can't have this monster, this monster, this monster, this monster, and it doesn't make sense. That's the thing that needs to be cut out of your head. Internal consistency, once you have gone through and generated all of the colorful and competing ecologies, is fine. But one must be first. You cannot have the internal consistency first.
Oh
And
yeah,
you
just
must
do the
open the
monsters and then
monsters
alter
first.
your dungeon a little bit so it makes more sense. Yeah, of
Right.
course.
And again, like the article was discussing, was preferably you have some excuses built into your dungeon for here's how these competing ecologies can come about. Here's giving yourself the easy way out. Well, there's unmapped regions of the dungeon because they can't be mapped.
Right.
And
Also,
from there, plenty of monsters come.
let's see how far Aaron applies these principles we have just discussed. Aaron, I see that you have a second dungeon map, floor 2.
Mhm.
Can you elaborate on this?
Okay, so just to put like give people an idea of what's going on here. So this is perhaps one of the you can see on 2 and 4 maybe one of the other potentially cardinal sins that I was thinking of, or at least I was gonna pitch to the group. And that is making something just an incredible pain in the ass to map. So the whole theme of this place is that it's you can actually see it on the page, the haunted crypt of an ancient conqueror. So you have a resting place for his more valued slaves, and then you have his there's a place to take offerings that are going to eventually work their way down to his resting place. There were people that would continue to worship him in death, kind of like my take on an Egyptian pyramid scheme. And you have with this place corridors that are quite unnecessarily windy in a lot of ways. So in what I was going for is that it's going to be a place where if you're not welcome, then it's gonna be difficult to traverse, and you have a gorgon that's running through here. You have some indications that exists, just because it's got you've got some stoned creatures and things like that.
Some statues, yeah.
Yeah,
Oh,
some
that's
statues.
classic foreshadowing. Yeah, of course.
And so the whole thing is that if you have to run from it, then there's a decent chance that you end up going the wrong way if you haven't been mapping right. Then you get cornered by it, and you're kind of screwed. That was kind of the thing that I was going for with it. And just that you may end up getting lost, especially on the 4th floor. That one, again, it's just continuing this whole labyrinthine thing where it's not obviously I could have made it much larger, and then
Yes.
just had it where you get it's so easy to get lost. And I actually ended up doing one later, a dungeon later that embraced that completely. But even whenever we were running through this, there were times when it was a little bit tedious saying, okay, so it goes forward 30 feet, then it turns left, and then it goes, forward 20 feet, and then it turns right. All of that stuff, like procedurally, it ended up being a little bit, it kind of pushed me back from doing that again when it comes to my design. I don't know. What do you think?
I think you what you just described, it's almost like a little bit of a skill, being able to describe geometry just quickly and clearly without confusion. But once you get the knack, I don't find it overly tedious. I think it's sort of like a part of the kind of like part of the game. Yeah, corridor continues for 60 feet, and then it terminates in a T section, and blah 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 blah. Right, there's a door in the west wall. I like the idea of like sort of a labyrinth, and then being chased by the gorgon. Did they actually, when you tested this, did this work? Did they actually get trapped?
No. Both times when I ran it, I had people that were mapping very thoroughly, and so whenever I ran it in BX, they were very experienced players, so they knew how to handle this incredibly well, and they almost immediately managed to pull off a blind, on the gorgon, with the light spell. At that point,
Nice.
I was using the BX rule, which basically says, they can't attack if you can't see. more or less, rather than the they've got a -4 penalty, which is what I would pull now from from AD&D.
Oh yeah,
But just because to me they should be able to flail in your general direction at least, right?
absolutely. Yeah, of course you
s-
can attack somebody who. I mean, if you're caught in darkness, right? If you run out
right.
of torches, you get attacked. You should be able to do something. You can still hear
Mhm.
them.
And so with the 5th edition group, they had a lot more at their disposal, and they also happen to have, even though I don't think that the player was incredibly experienced, he's an artist in a lot of ways, and he was just mapping brilliantly. I think he's done a lot of mapping for other purposes, maybe like architecture or something. I don't know, but uh,
Nice.
he is into archaeology, so maybe he just like looks at maps of tombs and shit. Who knows?
It is probable. I do find that the best mappers, they do move beyond beyond the what is it, a bunch of boxes connected via with a bunch of loops drawn through them, and I think it can go either way, either with like is it Paul/Janelle Jacques, like these very complex, almost like video gamey like maps that use verticality and have like you have like a main path, and then there's secret doors sort of layered around them. That was always very cool. Or they go the other way, where they make these areas that look realistic, but they still play very well. Yeah, it's such it's a huge asset if you can do that. I think I should probably that might be worthwhile actually checking out, because we read a lot of fantasy, right? Like Appendix N to understand D&D better. But I think there is a lot of probably a lot of knowledge that isn't really explicitly mentioned, but that can probably improve D&D. And I think something about ancient buildings probably works out.
I agree. So do you want to show us what you got?
Oh yeah, I've got tons. So I guess I'll just share my screen. Yes. Okay. I'll do this. Does this work? Or is this present mode? No, now you
Yeah,
just see
there
my
you go.
screen.
There you go.
Okay,
Whoop.
this is a nightmare.
Tell me when you're ready.
Sorry, stop sharing. I'll try again.
This was a question that I saw that I thought was interesting. I really don't know what my answer would be. What are the top 3 to 4 things a DM needs to know when they pick up one of our Dungeon 23 creations, like on the first page kinds of stuff? So the way that I read this is
let's
kind of like
answer this first. Sorry, go ahead.
the way that I kind of read this is, as if they're reading your Dungeon 23 end product and they're about to run it. It's like, what are the 3 to 4 things, the top 3 to 4 things that they need to know in order to be able to run it? I think that's what it's asking.
On the first page kinds of stuff. Level range, generic overview. You probably you don't need to do a rumor table, but it does add to it. It's all about I think information hierarchy, right? If you have effects that sort of this is something that they struggled with in the past, how to present certain information, and you would get very irritating keys where a certain noise would be audible from it would come from a certain room, and it would be audible in a couple of rooms around it. So where do you put that information, right? That there's a sound that people can hear. You don't put that in the room where the sound is coming from. You should at least put it in like in any room where they can hear that sound. You should put that information there, or you put it whatever, you put it in a bracket or something like that. But it's like when to present certain information is crucial. So things like I don't know, alarms being sounded, or just effects that predominate throughout the entire dungeon. I would definitely put that in the front. I would put that front and center.
I would probably also consider throwing in what happens if they don't mess with the dungeon, or if it doesn't have enough progress done. I put a timeline on mine. So, I'm doing the Dungeon 23 thing, and I basically put that within about 6 months, if it's, not touched, then the plan is that the goddess's influence starts to spread outside. Eventually, then like about a year later, she's got enough influence that she can exert her power, all across. And, so then it will start kicking up religious warfare between her and then like the competing current pantheon that already sealed her there to begin with.
Nice. That's great
I
too.
think.
Go ahead.
Oh, go ahead. No, you.
Oh, can you guys see this one?
Here we go. Bam.
Yeah, this is Night of the Walking Wet by Paul Jaquez. Now Janelle, and this one is really very nice. This is actually the dungeon starts in the it is down a cistern. There's a long winding stairway that sort of leads down. There's a monster lair here. I believe there's either water or acid in the bottom, and then it actually starts. It goes in here. There's like little nodes to find. I'm not sure if you can see it, but you've got all these secret doors as well. It really just an incredibly intricate sort of dungeon. Like these would be tombs that I'm indicating here, but then there'll be inscriptions on these family tombs that will sometimes lead to other areas. There's teleport traps that fling you in transport you to other parts of the dungeon. It's really a very nice piece of work, and I think it kind of like strikes a balance. This is more of a fantastical sort of geometry, right? Sometimes you'll even have you'll have passages that go under other passages. It's just is pretty good stuff. This is it's called Night of the Walking Wet. It was a dungeon in issue, I think it's issue 6 of the Dungeoneer. So it was a 78 or 79 magazine. So that was kind of my candidate for just good dungeon design. I'm violating the stipulations a little bit because I'm grabbing one extra good one, which is totally different, but it's also good. That's this one, like the Halls of Tizun Thane, I believe it's called. This one also rocks, but this is this is the sort of ruined mansion of a legendary wizard. The only thing is like something messed up happened to him, and now part of his mansion is overrun with monsters. I believe he himself has been eaten by a weird type of doppelganger that if it consumes somebody's brain, it will absorb their memories and take over his personality. So the wizard is still alive in monster form, feuding with his twin brother. You can, it has a rooftop section, so you could technically, if you would approach this place, you could climb up, approach it via different routes, all sorts of verticality. Really just terrific stuff. And this one, also uses has a far more realistic kind of like format and feel to it. So you'll find rooms have a certain purpose. You'll have storerooms, courts, that sort of stuff. So these are both, I guess, polar opposites, but they're both examples of pretty good dungeon design. And now I have for you a treat, ladies and gentlemen, by the great Harry Knuckles, Castle Caldwell and Beyond. Let me present to you, okay, this. Fucking look at it. And yes, this is every bit as agonizing to play as it is look, this fucking piece of shit. Sorry, I shouldn't swear so much. You're demonetized now. But look at this mess, okay? It's a line, all right? It literally is a line. These secret doors here, they're undetectable. This is actually where the villain of this stronghold, the villain is actually watching you through, I think they're like holes in the wall, so he can trigger various traps and taunt you, but you can't find him, right?
I did one dungeon like this once.
What?
I did one dungeon like this once, and it was to troll my players. I thought it was
right.
I had a large ooze chasing them, basically filling up the hallway behind them in a steady sort of progress. And I can't imagine putting it in a module. I thought it was funny at the time.
Right. It is almost a meme. Now, granted, this is a kind of a meme dungeon where part of the entries in B9 feel so terrible that you do get the idea that like they're like deliberately taking the piss. But it's sort of to illustrate the polar opposite. Like this is just a straight line. Terrible. Even if you, I mean, and this can still be good if you're great, if you're absolutely fantastic at writing linear encounters, you might still be able to pull this one out. But it's so, in a way, it's very restrictive and limited how you're going to approach this. There's only one way to go about it. Maybe if you would have pass wall, you could maybe skip something, but it's not very very dynamic. So these are it's kind of like my examples.
I mean, okay, but is his name really Harry Knuckles?
His I have reason to believe that this may have been done under a fake name. There's also I can kind of actually recommend checking out B9, not paying money for it, but checking it out because of they somehow managed to make like this in the TSR days, right? The B series, the language would already be condescending. They would already be going, "This is a +1 sword. Don't tell your players they found one yet," right? They would already be talking to you if you were a child. But here, they've somehow like managed to like to take it one step further, where it's just incredibly condescending when you read it. But so yeah, can recommend for for that effect alone, but not as an example.
I'm glad that I didn't bring like a the worst thing I could find, because there's no way that it could compare to that map. That map is a stroke of genius in its own way.
Oh yeah. No, there was another one actually that I'll try not to hog the entire broadcast, but we were talking about describing geometry, right? So this is Mordenkainen's Fantastic Adventure. I like this adventure a lot, actually. I wonder how it plays. It is very strange, but somebody pointed it out to me. You could probably still describe this map here, right? This is very complex, yada yada yada. But having to do this one would be very annoying. If you imagine, they enter room 55, and now you have to describe what this room looks like. That's going to take you a while.
The exact angles,
Yes.
from one spot to the next, exactly where it terminates, and then you have a new angle. Yeah, oof.
This is a paragraph.
That's one of the reasons why I almost never use any shapes that are irregular. I just don't do it.
Do you ever
other than
caves?
Caves? With caves, I'll do it with caves, but with caves, my descriptions are not as you go about this much, southwest, northeast, etc. Winds around a bit. I tend to be a little bit more vague. I know that that's not really helpful for the players so much, but
I think that's legitimate though for caves. I also give them the appropriate shape, so like it's like an oval or whatever, shaped like an eggplant. It's something like that, right? And then approximate dimensions, and then the location of other caves. I think that's probably the right way to do it. Oh geez, I guess I'll show the last one from a very good new adventure by Anthony Houzeau called Dreamhouse of the Nether Prince. And this would start you basically you're infiltrating Orcus's fortress, and you're going to beat the living tar out of him for real this time. This is no no Throne of Bloodstone shenanigans, right? This is the real deal. You kind of enter via the cavern system into this is Orcus's basement, and then what follows is a pure torture gauntlet. Just 3 or 4 floors. It's fantastic. 4 floors or 3 floors of pure hell onto the castle. But again, there's verticality as well, right? You could, if you wanted to, you could try flying up or going in through the battlements, or there's so many ways to go about this place, which I think is that in itself is already really adds to it. You could probably do a lot of good
Especially
stuff
when it
with
comes
just
to
go ahead.
assaulting a fortress or something like that. I often point out that when it comes to combat, even what you might regard as strictly combat-facing encounters, the environmental challenges or modifiers that can be added to the game, this is my justification for using weather in my game, unrelated, can change how your players actually approach or are incentivized to approach the various combat encounters. So if you're taking something over like an orc stronghold as if you were, I don't know, as if you were playing Shadow of Mordor or Shadow of War, then you're going to start thinking differently. You're going to start thinking in terms of verticality. Is there a way for the Overlord is probably up that tall tower there? Is a way that I could skip getting over these battlements? And then, of course, something goes wrong. The classic Colville screw. The party sells past all the encounters. An alarm is ringed, and then the entirety of the dungeon's forces come to collapse down on top of them, which is very funny.
Converge upon you, howling, converge upon you. Yeah, that rocks.
No, it's great because it changes the encounter types. Like, rare is the opportunity in most tabletop role-playing games to go through an endless defense style scenario, but in a dungeon that you have stealth through up until the point an alarm has been raised to indicate your position, then you finally get to do it. And suddenly character abilities like glyphs of warding, various traps that they might have access to, especially in newer school style games, the various traps that they might have access to, whether they're magical or natural in nature. Anybody who's been saving bear traps for the entirety of their adventure finally gets to bust them out of Liamon's tiny chest and start laying them along the hallways. It's fun. It's a very necessary way of breaking up the monotony of I enter a room, I'm always the aggressor, I enter the room, and then we kill everything that's in it to the best of our ability, and then we move on to the next one. And good dungeon design produces these. One way in which they do so, I'm going to pose, is via, let's see here, I'm going to put this out onto another window so I'm not complicated. No, I don't need to do that because, let's see here, share screen.
Yeah, let's see. Let's you do just a tab if you want.
I could do a specific Chrome tab. Excellent.
All right, here we go.
So, this is Tord Reimann. I had to whip this up in about a day, which is why it's not as detailed as I would like. Where am I going to start the explanation? So the explanation I was going to give it was the explanation of how I use negative space in dungeons. This dungeon is a hollow. It's kind of natural kind of dungeon. You can see through, if I were to drag one of these character tokens through, you can see through, it's very pockmarked and hold. If I go through the wall structure, which I built in Foundry VTT, it's very haphazard. It's meant to represent the roots and vines that make up the walls of this place, as opposed to rock, stone, and loam, are porous to some extent. You might catch it, because I'm running this in a VTT, I can give the players the sensation or the illusion of catching a glimpse of creatures and potential other encounters as they happen to be walking along. I think that beforehand there was so this section is meant to be closed off. There was a dragon that I spawned. There's a dragon that I spawned in this area. I think we ended up fighting somewhere over this direction later, but the party was able to notice them through some of the walls as they were traveling down this corridor to the right. Now, these areas have water between them because it's a hollow. The dungeon hollows are basically, the way I pitch them is it is a magical forest inside of a cave. You walk into a cave, there is a forest inside of it. And your corridors are made out of, again, roots and vines as opposed to something like rock and stone. The reason I make use of this is because there are various spells which are lower level than something like Pass Wall that basically act as pass wall, the opportunities to bypass certain sections of the dungeon. But target plants instead. Speak with plants in particular is one such example. And the last time when I did run this dungeon, we had 3 druids, all of which were more than high enough level to actually cast Speak with Plants. So they ended up circumventing large portions of the dungeon. They went from here to, I can basically retrace my steps if I go through this. Yes, so they opened up this section, commanded the roots to part, walked along this, again, section of negative space here, opened this section of the roots and came across some ettercaps and a log of, what was it? A group of ensnared pixies. I think it was an ensnared pixie hive. What was it? Yes, it was an ensnared sprite hive. Yeah, in its room is a porous log, more spherical than a typical tree trunk, littered with small holes. Attached to each of the holes are what looks to be tiny structures, miniature balconies, and landing platforms, made from leaves, resin, and bark. All but one log's holes have been sealed with webbing, and a complex structure resembling a lobster cage covers the largest hole within. Those of you with higher senses can hear the muffled, panicked voices within. And this was the impetus for starting an encounter with ettercaps. I had them drop down from the ceiling. That's the...
Nice. Sorry, the music has a sort of soporific effect almost. I feel like I'm entranced. It is that is a great looking map, by the way.
Thank you. It's by the way, I used for this because I got the idea of hollows from a game called Kingdoms of Amalur, which those dungeons were great. If you want to run anything Fae themed, you need to play that game.
I do wonder here, is it easy to see how much distance everything is? That's an old school concern.
So this is 100 by 100 squares. So it's a 500 by 500 dungeon. So if I go, here's my ruler. Something like.
Right. Oh, so you would, yeah. So it is possible, but you would have to, I don't know if they're walking through a corridor, right? Like in these in like OSR games. Because you have a fixed movement rate and then you have a fixed encounter rate, right? You usually, at least I find it helps to know how long everything takes. Makes a big difference as well.
Right.
But
a
so
lot
you
of
can do
these
that.
go
Nice.
from around 60 feet to around 80 feet. On the outer rings here, I started with like a web style structure, and then basically because it was there's a bunch of, you can probably see a bunch of spiders over here, and like I said, they fought ettercaps in this direction. So they're all over the place.
So
but then I
Force
basically
Awakens? Sorry. The soundtrack.
Not quite. But then I started breaking them up from there, breaking up these various rings, adding places where hallways that would lead to an interior ring would basically be cut off somehow. And that again was another opportunity for if you have a druid in the party, and they do typically prepare the spell for some reason. I don't know why. But as I stated in my redesign, one of the few where I praised the initial spell, Speak with Plants is basically pass wall for natural style dungeons. So I wanted to make natural style dungeons.
Or you could put like some sort of, what is it? I'm sure it doesn't see a lot of use, even though it's pretty cool. But like some sort of giant Venus flytrap, or it might also be a good idea.
Yes.
No, of course.
There's in the settlement appendix to Chilmus Valley, because that's what this is for. I'll get to that later. In the settlement appendix for Chilmus Valley, one of the options we have for natural settlements is a building called a mulcher. And the mulcher's purpose is basically to inflict attrition damage on any units that you might happen to bring into the dungeon. And because Chilmus Valley is a game partially about warfare, or a module partially about warfare. And while you can't bring men-at-arms past like the second or third layer of a dungeon, most hollows are typically something like a single wide layer that just goes inwards. So we wanted to have a way of adjudicating what that would happen. And the description we give for how they inflict this damage is typically, vines lashing out against the walls, A soldier happens to sniff a mushroom that bursts into poisonous gases. And the idea that like this place is seemingly quite nice, but it's absolutely deaf to bringing troops and units of arms in, because how like look at the structure of this. You're not going to maintain unit cohesion. It's somewhat confusing to go around. There are dead ends all over the place. If I go to the wall section, there's certain sections which are like partially above other floors, like this section here. This is intended to be, and if I had more time that particular day, if the players hadn't gone off in a completely separate direction from what I was expecting, I would have indicated that there was a raised floor here, that somebody could enter this room, see the raised floor, and say, aha, maybe we want to climb up that. So it gives us an opportunity to, again, circumvent a specific area of the dungeon. There were more ender caps over in this direction over here. So it gives players a few more interesting choices. The last thing I will praise in terms of natural dungeons is the opportunity to include potentially friendly animal companions. There's a giant ape over here, which, again, we had 3 druids. You can imagine what happened. They managed to befriend this ape over in this direction, and it proved great help against the foe that they were initially struggling with. So again, so my pitch for natural dungeons is, one, making them a little bit more confusing than typical hewn stone old mining trails would be, right? Mm-hmm. You make them more complicated, you can give them more dead ends, and have it a little bit more magical, like I said. And the music definitely adds to this. There's a reason why I picked from that particular soundtrack. The second is the use of negative space. In a natural dungeon, I can use, and you could probably figure out a parallel to this in something like a more standard style dungeon. I can't think of it off the top of my head, but places like these are places that you can go. It's just walled off. But if you could figure out a way to get in there, you could use that to scam. And that way to get in there might just be like hacking at it with an axe for about, I don't know, 2 hours or something like that, or less.
Oh yeah, that's another one. True. Blocked passages and that sort of stuff is also a little bit of a tradition. Yeah, that shows up pretty often as well.
And that's used for stuff like, again, Speak with Plants, which is pass wall for natural dungeons, and pass wall. So you can make use of the natural that negative space, and then of course you get to change up the ecology a little bit in terms of, this is an area in which I did kind of use a theme, not necessarily for the hostile encounters. I did a little bit with the webs and stuff like that, but with the neutral or non-hostile encounters, people walking into a dungeon and seeing birds that have no explicit mechanical purpose, but for which a use can be improvised, changes how the players think. Even in a 5th edition game, changes a little bit how the players approach.
Oh yeah, I can totally see that. That's again where the this little bit of verisimilitude comes into play. Totally.
Hell yeah. Yeah, I really like this. That's a type of dungeon environment that I don't really make enough use of. I tend to stick with the forts and the tombs and all those kinds of things quite a bit. I kind of got a little bit weird with one that I was working on for the public game, where it was all just, it was an underwater complex that you were aware of because of a dragon that was sleeping under all of it in the water, like in a deep sleep, and its breathing pattern would release bubbles periodically that would burst, and you could actually use bubbles to go from one section of the dungeon to another, and it was yeah, I need to get back to work. Did it work?
Were the bubbles on a certain cadence, or you're still working on it? Yeah, I was just thinking. Oh, go ahead.
Yeah. So it was, this was with the public game. I had many sites that I had already built up, and then I went back and and I didn't end up running all of them. So some of them were works in progress, and I would, once they chose that dungeon, then I would be like, okay, I've got like 2 days to get this finished.
Yeah, to get it in fighting shape.
Right,
Yeah,
right.
I do remember it is a lot less. I mean, writing a dungeon for somebody else to use versus like doing your own shit for just yourself is that is a huge difference, for sure. Uh, I this idea of like underwater dungeons. I'm trying to think back. There's probably a few of them that aren't quite terrible, but most of them do end up being sort of bad.
I
It's
imagine the expectation is generally on the players to, well, go ahead and invent some way of traveling through this place that you probably, especially in an old school game, probably don't have the resources to do.
Well, okay, so this is I actually got the idea from Final Fantasy 14, the Stormblood. So it actually had pockets of air that you could traverse. They didn't actually require any kinds of special things. There were things in the dungeon that they would be able to use.
Right.
that
Well, no,
could,
video games do this quite well. It's common in places like it's common in things like, I don't know, Legend of Zelda, right? To have resources that allow you to traverse the dungeon, or you receive items that allow
but
you
then
to
it's
do it earlier.
sort of like I feel then it's almost like you take it away, right? The whole point of like the fact that it's underwater is that it's sort of inaccessible. If you then immediately provide all the resources so they can move about freely, then it's almost like it is an adventure, any
Yeah.
old adventure above ground.
No, I'm going to disagree because the the resources that make it accessible to you are not symmetrical with the resources that make it advantageous to the monsters.
Sure. There's a few environmental. Provided, of course, I don't know if you have giant bubbles of air, you can. I'm not sure what you'd be able to get away with, but yeah, that is one of the. I guess one of the appeals is you can. It's much easier to explain away. Verticality and three-dimensional mapping.
Right.
You could probably get
Like one
pretty
of the
crazy
most
with
common excuses, or one of the most common implementations of making those dungeons accessible to you, is that they eliminate your natural buoyancy, the boots of steel that weigh you to the ground and let you sort of walk normally. The monsters. This is not applied to the monsters. So the merfolk swimming around at the top of the given dungeon room, throwing their tridents down at you, pose something of a significant problem, or pose something of a significant issue. Even though the dungeon has been made accessible to you, the encounter types have still not changed.
True. I would probably want to get some. I would be hesitant to sort of remove all of the. I guess the environmental effect on the players as well.
Right.
In fact, now that I think about it, one of my favorite levels, underwater levels, is in. I think it's in Lost Treasure of Atlantis or something. It was a pretty good adventure, but the entire dungeon wouldn't be underwater, but it would have a whole section that is underwater, right? There are, I think, somewhere scattered in this 200-room dungeon on this island, there are some items for you to to breathe underwater. But for the most part, you can envision just people. Sometimes you'll just have to try something out, or maybe you've got some resources to breathe underwater, but it's only for a short time. You kind of have to like sort of learn to figure out, okay, I'm in this new hostile environment. My fireball spells don't work anymore. How are we going to tackle this? I think if you can convey that, then that's like half the battle.
I'll also say it's an opportunity for spells that normally would not get used outside of a watery environment, or cannot be used outside of a watery environment. This is something of a failure on the. This is something of a design failure. There aren't many spells that you can only use underwater or are most effective underwater, and players didn't do enough spell research, I don't think, or keep that tradition alive long enough to start engaging with those. There's this kind of history of underwater dungeons just being crap, people not wanting to engage with them. But having special effects that only take place underwater, if you have a spell called River Briars, and it's like Aaron, you've played 5e, you know the spike growth spell, I'm sure.
Mhm.
which I think actually showed up in earlier editions.
Yes, stone spikes or something like that.
Right.
I recall something
they're
like
just
that from D20.
like this is
at the very
basically
least. Maybe before
yeah.
that even.
natural caltrops, if you will. Yeah, so if you have a section of natural caltrops, it's pretty good. The equivalent of that for something like an underwater environment might be something like river briars, where you unleash these, but they're forced to go along with the current, so they're going to move through. You have an expectation of movement in something like an underwater dungeon. You have currents; it's not necessarily all stagnant. Used in video games all the time is the movement mechanics, sending you from one end of a room to another.
I think the kind of the problem with that is that you, in general, right? This is an underwater dungeon is kind of like a change of pace, and all of this these custom spells, and well, to a lesser degree, I mean, there have always been like magic items, like what is it, Cloak of the Manta Ray, potions of water breathing, all that stuff, allowing you to operate underwater, right? But it's always going to be sort of I guess a change of pace. So it'll have. I feel like in a way it'll be like sort of like limited. But yeah, who knows, right? If you make certain spells that are like very much focused on aquatic adventuring, it might become more appealing. I'm sure there's probably some 2E supplement or 3E supplement at the very least, where they really go all in on underwater campaigns. But yeah.
I remember there being a third-party 3E supplement. I don't remember. I don't think I've read it, so I don't know if it's any good. But there was a whole third-party supplement for underwater campaigns.
Pathfinder, I think, yes. Yeah, you had a buoyancy score and everything, and a whole monster manual and like aquatic races. Yes, very ambitious. I don't know if you can play it, but who knows?
Yeah, I just kind of like you get to use some of the same or similar problems that you would have in like a space environment, where you can just have oxygen and pressure, go nuts on the players. You can there's just different things that you can do. With that particular dungeon, I had it where there are certain things that could go awry, such that an entire section can just be completely flooded instantly, and or you can be rushed over, like he was saying with currents. You can be swept over from one section to another section with very little ability to help yourself. You'd have to maybe make some types of I don't know. I guess for that I might use like open doors or a bend bars, lift gates, or something like that.
But no, but that's great. You could even consider something like a way to drain part of the dungeon, or I have seen people use tides before, where part of the dungeon was flooded at certain times. That was also kind of interesting, because you could get like maybe cut off, or you would have certain problems. You'd be up to your waist in water versus entirely dry at different times. So it kind of adds an extra little element to the dungeon that the players can figure out and manipulate. That is always kind of cool.
Well, we need to formally acknowledge Dan. How's it going, Dan?
Hey, not bad.
So we've just been talking about good things and bad things in dungeon design, and bringing up examples if we have them. So if you have an example that you'd like to share of good or bad, then you're more than welcome to present it. Or if you just want to throw your 2 cents out there.
Yeah, I don't know. I was just trying to suss out where the conversation is at, and it sounded like you were talking about underwater dungeons, which they get a rep for being kind of gimmicky when they happen. I'm actually right now I'm running Stars Without Numbers, so there's definitely going to be a 0G outer space vacuum dungeon at some point, I'm sure.
Heck yeah!
That's always great. I
Actually,
think
the first session, they were the players basically foiled Space 9/11, and I had a random table written up every because the terror it's instead of flying a plane into the building, the terrorists are taking over the space station, and by hacking the command center, and I'm have a random table to roll every 10 minutes for what system they manage to subvert, and if it's the life support on deck 12, that means deck 12 is going to be a vacuum or whatever. So lucky for the players, they didn't get spaced halfway through the adventure. Would have been kind of funny if it didn't happen.
I remember those vacuum rules being pretty brutal.
Yeah, they're
being
pretty
in a
hard, as they should be.
yeah. What is it? A save versus death and D20 damage if you pass every round. Yeah, pretty good. Fuck.
I mean,
I think. Oh, go ahead.
it's fair. I feel like that's pretty fair. Vacuums are ain't nothing to fuck around with. I said a bad word. Oh no.
Oh no, but
We're all demonetized now.
I think probably space as a medium. I feel like there's actually a lot you can do with it. At least in theory, it sounds cool, right? Because you instead of your torches or something, you would just have like, okay, you have your oxygen meter, and if you're out of oxygen, okay, game over, man. And then like maybe you could maybe like you just share some oxygen or pull it off a dead guy if you get stuck, or I feel you can really use that element of timing very well. This idea of that you have to quickly get in and out before you're screwed. It has this potential to just be so incredibly hostile. If you can somehow channel that in your dungeon design, it would probably be pretty cool.
Yeah, I had a lot of fun with using life support as a thing in the. I did one for Machinations of the Space Princess. Grim Jim's space
Thing,
opera.
yes.
Space.
Well, hold on. It's I happen to very much love the system. I mean, so now take I haven't read Stars Without Number. I know that's the typical go-to. So that may be the one that would win in the battles for me had I actually read it.
Oh no, I think I must recommend some one of my favorite games. You may have heard of Lancer by Master Threats.
Oh, now we're getting into mechs. Come on, man.
No, let's not get in. I was just talking about
No mechs.
with another group the other day. It's I still haven't.
No, but I bring those guys up because they are quite effective for making space, for whatever reason, in that game. Space-themed dungeons or dungeons in space are making use of space are extraordinarily effective because, again, that entire game is focused on your equipment, as a lot of sci-fi games are. And spaces where, maybe you're forced to get out of your mech. I take a lot from the Titanfall games, of course, because I'm a huge Titanfall nut.
I do love Titanfall.
Like all those sections in the game where you were forced out of your mech because BT is too big to follow you and you have to run sort of parallel to him, or you've been separated for some reason, are really fun in a game like Lancer. And it turns out the pilots have enough resources on their own that they can survive outside of their mechs. And you can get into, like, in this game, which is broadly speaking about mech on mech combat, get into a little bit of dungeon crawling, and it works masterfully. There's also Spelljammer, which I can't believe I didn't mention, which I've done a little bit of because something like 5 years before...
5th edition Spelljammer?
No, because 5 years before WotC finally released Spelljammer for 5e, and it was crap. I gotta remember, we're not past the 2 hour mark. It was crap. I did a Kickstarter, which was very successful, and finally published a book called Astral Tides, which had a whole bunch of thematic conveyances, they're called, because I'm not allowed to use the term Spelljammer. details about different planets and cosmologies and function, different transient planes that you would be going through. And of course, what would happen if you went into actual space? And I think season 2 of the West Marches is where I got to run some dungeons and some scenarios that dealt with the vacuum of space, again, on account of the fact that players would journey out there, sometimes unintentionally.
I haven't had any particular desire to look into Spelljammer. I don't, for some reason, I just don't want D&D in my space stuff.
Is it too goofy? Is this the objection?
It is.
I
goofy.
I feel like it's just a mixing of genres that it's kind of like the whole reason that what's that like cyberpunkish one, Shadowrun?
Shadowrun.
Yeah.
Yeah, it's the same reason why I have a hard time with that. I just usually there are a lot of situations where I like my chocolate and my peanut butter together, but in this situation, I don't know. I tend to go more toward the Star Wars-esque, not exactly Star Wars. It can be a little bit filthier. Like Machinations of the Space Princess. It can be. But like I don't typically like to include fantasy races with my alien races, even though I will say that I do like having a crashed spaceship on in Greyhawk, and having
that's allowed. Okay.
Right. Well, let's think about this for a moment. The line between space fantasy and nautical fantasy is far thinner. In terms of that particular Venn diagram is way closer to a circle than something like cyberpunk and fantasy adventure gaming, So it's understandable. And ditto we could extrapolate from that example what a crashed spaceship represents. That's basically a new dungeon. And dungeons are these places of chaos, as we were discussing earlier, places to round it all back. Places of chaos, competing and colliding ecologies that don't necessarily make sense, weird terrains that you're not necessarily, and biomes that you're not necessarily familiar with, and have effects that you may or may not be prepared for. And so a crashed spaceship fits that to a T in a way that doesn't necessarily translate to then wanting to go out into space. I'll say that I'm attracted to that because, one, I like the idea of wizards colonizing other planets. And the cover of Jack Vance's one of the Tales of the Dying Earth collections has an image of just a castle floating in a small group of clouds in space around, like, presumably orbiting the Earth.
Yeah, that's how they got their Youndstones, I believe.
Right.
They were specifically from dead stars, something like that. Yeah,
so that's particularly attractive fantasy to me.
I totally agree. The crashed spaceship, again, as a change of pace, pretty awesome. There's something, I don't know, very, very pulpy about having your medieval warriors fight just robots or stormtroopers or something. It has that sort of like, it's very fantastic, kind of. That's part of the appeal of Dungeons and Dragons. But having to actually go to like Spelljammer. I've always when I read it, I was like, well, concepts are kind of cool, but I feel turning those books into like something you could actually run, there is a little bit of a gap there. You do probably have to put in some work. It's like not all of the steps have kind of been. It's not as smooth a transition.
It's mechanic without a campaign is the problem. Like back in it long already, by the time Spelljammer came out, and this also applies obviously to 5th edition, even my own Astral Tides, already the concept of people bringing their characters from one table to the next was eliminated, was gone from the hobby. The idea that plane shift was a mechanism for going to ill-described planes of existence had already taken over the idea that plane shift would be used to do something like go from one friend's table to another and bring your character over. The idea that we were all playing in the same kind of shared universe was gone at that point, and Spelljammer would be a perfect mechanism for that. But we had already lost that element of fantasy adventure gaming where we would go from table to table to table. Like especially nowadays, and hey, here's another use for dungeons, just to make sure I stay on topic. I look at all the different campaigns that my friends are running and thinking, guys, why don't we just, like, these maps could fit together so easily. We could just take turns DMing for different areas of this campaign map, which is a combined campaign map, so easily. And I know that these people are not as worried as some other people on the internet might pretend to be about, but the sacred lore of my world cannot be contradicted. So it requires this very fine eye of Sauron to scour over all player abilities and actions. Like, no, at this point, like, we're all having trouble keeping up consistent games, especially when we're required to run like 2 a week. Let's just combine these things. It would be so easy. It would be so trivially easy. Let's just run into each other's worlds. It would be handy. And that's something you could, again, suppose you could do with dungeons, is have portals to other worlds, portals to other campaigns.
I saw something. What is it? Wasn't Metamorphosis Alpha, right? Like one of the first science fiction games was like inside a giant colony ship, right?
Yes. And that was a
ship,
mega dungeon.
That was great. Yeah.
Mm-hmm.
Partially because you didn't necessarily know it was space, or rather your characters didn't necessarily know it was space.
I think this is a necessary question at this point, because we haven't gotten it from you. What's a dungeon you like, Dan?
What is a dungeon I like? Given that I usually end up rolling my own, which is kind of half pre-written and half improvised out of bits I've planned ahead. On the ones people have heard of, I'd say Keep on the Borderlands is always good to pull out.
Hell yeah.
B2 is classic for a reason. B4, The Lost City, I really like that one. The Sinister Stone of Saqqara, which that's an Axe module that I actually played through with the designer. That was fun too. And I've run that. That's really good. Modules I like. I've run, it's a 5th ed third-party module, Minds, Claws, and Princesses I've run that for a couple of 5th ed groups and gotten
that one is great too.
That is
remember.
Fun.
Yes.
I had the first group I ran it for, there's like a chimney in the top of the dungeon. It's like a secret, semi-secret shortcut to the middle of the orc lair. And the first group went straight down the chimney. The
get all the way to the
group I ran
dragon,
for decided the chimney was too dangerous, so they stormed the front gate and all got killed.
Nice. Yeah, I remember Minds, Claws, Princesses. That was one of the earlier reviews I did.
Yeah.
Well, at least like submitted by it was a donation basically from the guy who wrote it, but it was really good stuff.
Yeah, that's really good.
Hell yeah.
What was the other Axe one? Is it's not really a dungeon module, but all the little mini adventures in Capital of the Borderlands are pretty good, and they all kind of tie together. It's a good city sandbox.
With is there anything that sort of differentiates Axe adventures from more like BX adventures or AD&D adventures?
I'd say, they're kind of written to tie into the Axe world building and domain building mechanics. And Sinister Stone, for example, is kind of a retread of the idea, a lot of the scenario in Keep on the Borderlands. And it's sort of rewritten with another 20 or however 30 years in the hobby, and making some of the implications of D2 more explicit than that. Like there's pretty explicit notes on what all the NPCs are up to. There's someone wants us to kick Prince and whoever that is. There's an explicit timer that if you don't fix the problem, the evil artifact is going to spread its influence, this many feet through the land per day. Things like that.
So more focus on like the corrupting influence of chaos as well.
Yeah.
Nice.
And so a lot of body horror and some, I know what's his name, Bryce thought it was a little overwritten, which it could be if you don't want to hear about the details of how the village bathhouse is set up or anything like that. But I mean, it's useful information if you actually find a use for it, which I know some of the BroSR guys were made a whole heist out of, I think, robbing the keep or something like that. I don't remember the details.
Something about robbing it through by way of a chamber pot. I think it was a specific
latrine.
bullying Jeffro into specifying which room was the chamber pot and saying, okay, well, it must have this, and this. So we're going to try to go up here, and provided this is accurate so far, if you think this works, we're going to make your entry up through here and start slaughtering. That was about 2 years ago, I want to say.
It sounds like a fun campaign.
Yeah.
Mm-hmm.
It really does.
No, I've bullied. Speaking of mega dungeons, I have bullied Jeffro into once again picking up the DM torch, picking a night to do some mega dungeon running because he's been complaining that there haven't been enough dungeon runs within the current BroSR mega campaign. Which I'm going to start writing up play reports for those. It should be very exciting. I'm pulling my old druid back out of retirement. So I'm sure I'll have some insights there because that's another group that we've really every 3 months a new thread on dungeons comes up about the weird and wacky things you should be including in them to solidify that they these chaotic delves into the underworld. I think the most recent one we came up with was aquariums. That's something. Go ahead and mix your underwater and regular dungeons here. There's another use of the negative space that we were specifying earlier.
Mm.
The hollow that I showed you guys on stream. That water is at waist height, but it doesn't have to be. And that waist height water doesn't prevent it certainly from invoking a combat encounter. I believe that we waded through in B2. There was a flooded section of the temple, the flooded floor, or the floor that was only partially flooded. I believe we fought a bunch of eels in that particular room.
Yeah, that wasn't. It was the B2 campaign, but that's a different adventure. Right. That's right. Yeah, it's flooded temple.
Right, and so I was playing TS's character. I was filling in for TS and playing his character, I think. And that's an exciting opportunity, is fighting aquatic creatures in an open air environment. Again, you could use waist-high water for that. But certainly you wouldn't have to. You could, again, in the hollow example, have that be, well, this is so deep that it goes like this is the depth of a river, or perhaps a deep enchanted lake. And there's creatures swimming about throughout the course of the dungeon. So folks who are attempting to bypass certain encounters with negative space have to choose which one they prefer, like the devil they know or the devil that's nibbling at their toes in the water.
Mm-hmm. Mm. I like that.
There must be something people can get out of. I don't know. I was intrigued by the possibility of taking a canoe in the dungeon and then boating around. It didn't really work out in that particular example. But
no, but it would have. It would have. We were on a time clock that we were not necessarily aware of. But
that's true.
Have we done it sooner? We would have gotten away with it.
Oh yeah.
I'm confident at the very least.
So this is a little bit off topic, but I thought it was maybe interesting to hear y'all's perspectives on it. Michael says, I joined a table where passing the DM torch was required. Even new people have to try when it's their turn. It can be painful sometimes, not going to lie. The reason I DM is because I do not enjoy unprepared games. So how do y'all feel about the idea of a table where you have to pass the torch, or that's expected?
Well, it really depends on the frequency, but my first instinct is to not do that.
Yeah, at a single table, like I love my buddy Dennis. I do not enjoy his games. I enjoy his one shots. While I was playing in New Jersey, the campaigns that he ran were not to my taste. And I have different evaluations on the other folks who ran in that game. And I'm pretty sure everybody did except my buddy Geo. I don't know. I no longer think in terms of the table though. I'm now thinking in terms of like this grand, like, okay, sneak these people into my game. There's multiple people who are already running, already fostering and training groups of players to be ready. And my perspective now is we already have all these people who are feeding trained players into their own games, but wish that they could play more often, or wish that they could run more often, and wish that they could have a more expansive game. So the concept of you have one table that you play at and that encompasses one campaign is no longer of interest to me. I'm now trying to figure out how I can sneak people into. I might have to use Steam for this, but I'm confident I could do it. How to sneak people from a variety of campaigns and referees from a variety of campaigns into the same kind of like mega campaign that allows them to run and play more often, and just have grander events happen, because it could be a lot to handle as one DM. If you're running for, like, if you're the lone DM of a West Marches server, it's difficult.
But this I think with this rotating thing, right, that they asked about, I can just envision just the idea alone that you have to come up with this shared campaign world. I know some people get very excited at the prospect, but maybe they don't realize the actual reality of it. I've always had like immense trouble as a DM to the idea that you have to sort of negotiate with other dungeon masters about what happens. You kind of have to share everything. I think maybe in a West Marches campaign, I guess in a giant shared map, it could work, but it seems mildly unpleasant.
Trying to do like a stupid story gaming nonsense where we're following like a specific adventure path and we need this to happen on day Y and we can't let players advance past this. In that campaign, I could see, if you're running like a 5th edition module, I could see that being absolute torture, absolute hell. But when it comes to something like West Marches servers, or again, just the Broasar mega campaign, where folks are coming and going from Trilopolis to Machador to the Dead Sands.
Right, but do you rotate your does everybody? It's not really rotating there, right? You still have DMs and players.
Yeah, DMs and players, but the people who DM can play, and the people who play can DM. They can just say, I want to run a dungeon off in this area over here, or I want to be a player like B-dubs can, like, I don't feel like running Axe tonight, or it's not the night that he usually runs Axe, so he's free to play in the Trilopolis game. That's kind of the idea.
Well, so I've ended up having kind of the rotating thing happen, not really as a plan. It just kind of happens, both in real life and my online groups. So, in the in real life one, we get to a point where campaign is concluded, and then somebody says, "Hey, I've got an idea for one," and then it just kind of goes from there. Now, one of the only really serious problems I have is that I love DMing a lot more than I like being a player, and it makes it so that it's hard for me to commit to a campaign for a long time, especially if I have like serious time crunches and things like that. It just makes it incredibly difficult I don't know if it's that I'm just a bad player or I'm just addicted to DMing, but
I feel
it's
that's almost every DM.
Well, I mean, there are a lot of DMs that are just like, well, I do it because otherwise we don't get to play. You know,
Is that a
and-
thing? Holy
Yeah.
shit.
Yeah,
Yeah,
fifth edition, dude. The
That's
DM
what I hear.
crisis is
That's horrible.
bad. Okay, they were not whoever it was. Questing Beast was, yeah. Questing Beast was not.
Is that the
well, I
guy
think
who
it's
invented
Questing
one-on-one time?
It
Beast.
is.
No, that was the
No.
scumbag who couldn't be persuaded to make take 2 seconds to credit his sources, from which he took the phrase one-to-one time and always on campaigns and stuff.
Right. But so the okay.
The
no,
buttons are
just
hold on a second. The buttons are going down if you keep it up. I want you to understand that. I went
Sorry.
to the gym. It's
Okay.
the shirt is a little bit tighter than it normally is. The buttons
It's a
will
little
go down
intense.
until morale improves.
Josh
Oh,
just says
jeez.
take it off.
Okay. All right.
With the online one,
Yeah.
so I was running in Greyhawk, first edition, and I just couldn't run anymore, just because of job things that came up, and so Arnman is currently running the group, and
But you kept the same. You kept the same world, I guess.
same world, same characters, everything is the same. So I mean, I guess if you're saying rotate DMs for new campaigns, then I guess that goes out of it. But I could see this working really well whenever you do have an established world that everybody just kind of has the same concept of what a campaign should look like. Because they're continuing trying to run AD&D in the spirit of the game as much as possible. You have plenty of stuff to work with Greyhawk to be like, okay, this is about how the spread of magic items and high level characters and all these kinds of things should be, because we have all this history with modules and everything that you really don't have to have that great conferring of minds to agree on how to keep the campaign going. And I'm fairly certain that if I think that they said that if my time frees up, then they'd be happy to have me again. But in which case then it would be Arnman runs for as long as he likes, maybe forever. But if for some reason that he can't anymore, then maybe somebody else takes the torch, and we continue to have that world go on.
I can kind of see how if you've got a lot of like procedures to abide by, you can kind of keep everybody more in the same ballpark. I'd envision something. What I hear, we would switch it up. I'd envisioned it like just not like serially. I can imagine that after you've run for I don't know how many years, that you're like, all right, guys, I'm handing in my sword or my badge. I mean, we had that when we grew up in high school, but just the idea that you would rotate like every 3 or 4 sessions or something. I don't know. I have this idea, especially in old school games. Some people they really do seem to enjoy playing a lot more, and other people, they are like natural GMs. When they play, it's like you said, right? They still like it. I mean, I like playing D&D too, but I love running it, right?
Mm-hmm. Yeah, this just for a second, I wanted to show y'all like how we did it with the public when this isn't the rotating GMs, but this is like shared, just having to confer with everybody to keep everything on level. And this was for the public game, and this was even whenever all we were doing really was we just had yes, I do have clips of
OSC
OSC in there because that's what we were using at the time. But we have a lot of like just things that we can keep guidelines for all of the referees that come in order to keep the consistency up fairly.
Oh,
as far
that's
as, like,
fancy. Very good.
The spread of XP, how things should be populated. The fact what roles should be public, what should be private. That way, there aren't games where people are concerned about people doing stuff behind the screen that's untoward. Making sure all the prices are about the same. And I would imagine that in a more structured, like in a more open, style of play where it's more than just dungeon delves, pretty much, then you would just need more and more and more. Everybody, and you'd have to meet on a very regular basis with the other referees in order to keep everything up, and it would be a lot. It would be a lot. Definitely a lot more than I could chew on right now. I think that's my retirement plan right there. When I retire, is I'm just gonna run a giant open table campaign like that with a bunch of referees.
You could imagine a campaign like that, just kind of dictate, hey, by the way, we have a dungeon that we'd like to run. We made this dungeon. Here's the key for it. If you'd like to do something kind of easy and low intensity, instead of dealing with like wider, world like events on the world map, and you just want a chance to run, here's a dungeon that you can handle, can be yours for this particular session, provided you're willing to keep doing it. You could probably have those intermediate. You have different levels of ref or different stress levels for the refs in something like a West Marches game.
So Giant Goose has a question: when you meet for sessions like that, what are the frequency and length of the sessions? So for the public game, whenever that's what we were doing, frequency was pretty much weekly usually. So when I say weekly, though, it was like you would usually have like a same time slot that would be every week, but there'd be multiples of them with different referees. So some people would play with their character on Monday, and then they'd play in the same character in a different dungeon on Wednesday, and all that. So we had to use one-to-one time to make that kind of make sense. And sometimes characters had to sit out because they needed to regenerate. They need to get that HP back or whatever. But the length of the sessions, usually I would say anywhere from 2 hours to 4 hours. I think some people went a little bit longer, but it just depends on how much the referee can handle.
If you keep the pace a little bit, 4 hours is quite enough for a decent evening of adventure.
I don't like to go over 4 hours. In fact, for me, I like to do 3. I feel like 2 is a little bit too short. 3 is just kind of the magic area for me.
Yeah, I feel longer than that. You're going to have to schedule a break anyway. And well, I mean, when we still played across the table. So I've played as a player, right, Axe for 2.5 or 3 years or something, and then we would play for 6 or even 8 hours, right? But then you would take you would chat a little bit more. The pacing, it wouldn't be as intense. I still think that with 4. If everybody's just goes there and is focused, you can get a pretty decent session of gaming done in 4 hours, no problem.
I generally prefer something like 5 to 6 hours. I prefer the content that can be smacked in there. Of course, I'm having issues with 5th edition and running online that naturally slow the game down in certain areas. Also, a little bit of problem play, but that should be wiped out quite swiftly. So, I don't know. Like, I'm interested in the dungeon I showed you guys earlier. Like, we only went through like 2 or 3 branches of that particular dungeon. I would have definitely would have preferred going through the more significant portion of it had there just not been delays. I do go with breaks that are usually going to be somewhere between 20 minutes to an hour in between that section. That gives me an opportunity to prep if the players have gone off in a different direction, or just to make the dungeon at hand a little bit more sophisticated if I feel the need. Or the encounters at hand a little bit more sophisticated.
Yeah, it does really suck whenever you've used like maybe the first hour or so just planning and traveling and getting to the location, and then you're maybe like halfway through and then it's time halfway through the dungeon, and then it's time to quit. That does kind of suck, you know, because then once you're getting everybody back into the frame of mind and everything, yeah, it's just I think really one of the biggest reasons I don't tend to do those longer sessions is because I usually play on weeknights, and it gets late. You know, I got work, and it gets late.
And somebody brought it up that IRL 4 to 6 hours that's relaxed. That's pretty good. Behind your computer 4 to 6 hours is less so. I mean, we've done it. Well, 4 hours is fine, right?
Yeah.
But like 6, ooh,
I can do
already
4
pretty
hours
rough.
tops on the computer.
Even
then, it's not the same. I mean,
after that, so it's feeling
I've
like
disavowed online gaming for the last 6 months now, I guess.
I mean, if you can find an old school group in person, then go for it. Absolutely do it. I feel like I could, you know, whenever the current DM is done in my local group, then maybe I could convince them to try Swords and Wizardry, or maybe first edition, maybe. But
finally, could it be all those videos? Initiative?
I don't.
You're running towards an archer. You've got a halberd and a movement speed of 4 inches. You're 60 feet away. How do we determine initiative?
Good God.
Who strikes first?
Well, I mean, so you get the shot off. Archer gets a shot off first almost every time, I would imagine, especially if you beat them on the roll.
Well,
it depends on if the archers.
Well,
I mean, does the archer have an arrow knocked and ready, or does he have to lift his bow?
I think if he has an arrow knocked and ready, he goes first anyway, right?
Go first, yeah.
It counts as
it would be easy to go first.
Oh yeah. Otherwise,
he's not sitting there, you know, ready for this halberdier to just charge straight at him.
Otherwise, it's the difference. The difference. What is it? The difference on the initiative dice, and then you look at the number of segments and the distance he needs to close.
Right.
Yeah.
Right. Yeah, that's one of the. So movement is honestly probably like my biggest bugaboo when it comes to the for one initiative thing. Just because then you do have to do that math of, you know, how far can they get with this movement speed, you know, in that amount of time, you know, before this thing goes off. That's just one of those things I'm just like, oh man, you know, can I just do second edition, just roll a D10 and then it all happens all at once?
I think segments, segments are okay. Initiative is kind of complicated in 1E. I feel like once you actually get the hang of it, maybe it's probably pretty good. But
that's
yeah,
what EOTB says. I believe him.
Okay, what would the learning curve be? Yeah,
I think Arnman has been using that in the 1E game that that he's running. That was the one that I was running before. That's what I heard, is that they were using pretty much everything as written. So it seems to be doable. I feel like in a VTT it might be a little bit easier, because then you could just go up, you know, segment by segment as far as the movement goes, and then everybody just drags their token.
Yeah, of course. And even then, when I played Dream House of the Nether Prince with Setembrini, Gabor was there too. Right, it ran super smoothly. Because Setembrini knew the rules so well. So people have this image of like AD&D is kind of like this clunky game, but like I think as soon as you've internalized it, you can just go like, oh, okay, no, we're doing it like this. And if you can't remember one particular exception exactly, then you basically just brush over it, right? You just keep the game going.
Weapon frontage rules. What are weapon frontage rules?
First, to see how the MM style. Do you want to tell us what you're talking about?
Oh, it's okay.
Yeah,
it's movement,
I'm not sure what he's referring to either.
Movement, missile, melee, magic.
Yeah.
Okay. So swords and wizardry uses it. BX uses it. I think it's a little bit different in each one. Because Swords and Wizardry, it's like winner of initiative movement, loser movement. It goes back and forth. And then with BX, I want to say it's like winners everything in that
Yes.
order,
All
losers
one
everything in that
glorious
order.
phase.
I kind of like the back and forth one a little bit more, just because then it, we're keeping up the whole thing of, it's the actions that take this much time. It's just that you're getting yours started a little bit faster.
Yeah, and it's also, I imagine, a little bit easier to get shots off. And
Mhm.
losing initiative or winning initiative isn't this absolutely devastating,
Right.
but it's fine.
Mhm.
That is true, Brad. He says, one of these combat rules show its wargame roots. You can run mass battles entirely within its rule set just fine. I mean, reading Chainmail and then reading the combat system in AD&D, you get to see, where it came from. There's some similarities there. I did some mass combat with Chainmail rather than, but you can just up the scale in with 1E and it'll work. I think that's what Swords and Wizardry does as well. Is it just increases the scale. And there's just a few little extra considerations you have to have. Okay, weapon frontage, he says, meaning how weapons need 5 feet or more plus to fight effectively.
Don't say its name. You will call its attention.
I almost said it because I was about to read Forrest's comment. So how does it work in cramped corridors? I mean,
certain weapons would simply be restricted, right?
Yeah. That's kind of how I look at it. And especially the use of missiles almost goes entirely out the window, because then you're just firing into your own ranks, unless you're fighting against stuff that's really tall.
Yeah. Well.
Let's see. Well, is there anything else that y'all are interested in discussing now that we're I feel like we've done the dungeon design thing quite well.
Yeah, I'm certainly down to do a little bit of shenanigans around sacred cows.
Sacred cows, yes. Well, we have to know what everybody's sacred cows are. Well, so is there anything? Okay, is there anything that people hold sacred that you guys just do not like, do not use, or you use it but you hate it? Use it because maybe it's expected, but you can't. You secretly just you want to do other things. Maybe what you want to do doesn't really work, or not work, but wouldn't work with the group.
I'm trying to think. No, wait. So there's rules we're using that we secretly hate them, but the group, if we would alter them, the group they would avert their eyes in disgust.
This is easy for me because I run a lot of 5e. So
yeah, same here. We actually have a group in New York here we're running a West Marches campaign, but they're running it in 5e, so it's not the best.
So it's not as good. This
not
5e.
I've been running games for these guys, and in 4 or 5 hours they get through 2.5 encounters.
That there is a sort of element it always fascinates me that like certain editions of D&D will certain dungeon masters will get certain traits, right? But that with 5e, the most common trait is that you're running it like, oh yeah, I have to. It's the only way I can get a group, or it's the only people in my area. That's kind of funny.
Well, hopefully, some of them are talking about getting away from it because of that all the OGL drama going on. So hopefully they actually follow.
P2E books are selling out near me. It's very delightful.
I was tempted at one point to maybe buy Pathfinder 2nd edition and look at it just to see, what the craziness is. But then I realized, before I go in any kind of direction like that, I think I'd rather just do 13th Age, which I already have. Which I know that those are not exactly compatible. They're not even similar necessarily, but having I'd rather lean into kind of more gamist combat mechanics that still kind of preserve being very runnable and kind of simple as far as like how they work, as opposed to having increased complexity and more focus on character building that like builds layers and layers on top of itself, if that makes sense.
Well, I suppose I have two sacred cows I could attack. One is anti-character building, if I wanted to follow from Aaron's description. The other one I could follow from is the sort of GM dichotomy, the idea that you either have a GM-less or even diceless game, or your other option is one person who is in total absolute control of not only the game's functions and functions as a referee, but is also in total control of its design and the scenario at all times and how the players interact with it. That to me is a sacred cow that I cannot wait to get rid of. Because so far in the industry, we've primarily just had, if you don't have a GM, if you don't have one GM, there's everybody else is, it's a free-for-all, right? And there's some mechanics to adjudicate, maybe agreements between players on what happens, or maybe there's some kind of random process by which events happen. But we haven't seen stuff like, okay, well, here's a referee for the world player, and here's a referee for the player, for the player's abilities and how they work. Because what you see increasingly as time goes on, especially in games which are either more complex or have a higher level of detail, right? Either one of those. We had a fun discussion in your server about those two different phrases and what they mean to us a couple of days ago, is that GMs are increasingly unawares of how the player mechanics are intended to work or how the design is intended to function. And I see this most commonly in the OSR sphere, to be perfectly honest with you, just ripping out specific player-facing or even world-facing rules because, like, I think I could get this with some other way. Let me rip out one-to-one time, because now that I know why this rule was put in here, I can supersede Gygax. I can stand on his shoulders and implement some other procedure that doesn't actually serve either the purpose of the rule or its secondary consequences. I see this all the time.
And you want to solve this by implementing a second DM.
Yeah. Have one person who is there for the world layer, knows how the world layer works, and know how it's supposed to operate, and one person who knows how to, again, in the context of increasingly complex or higher level of detail games, is there just to be like the player advocate for like, no, this is working as intended. It's the entire point of his class that he's supposed to be able to bypass this one kind of encounter. And the fact that you, Mr.
These would
GM,
be fighting. The players would have a DM sort of protecting their interests.
yes,
Sort of adversarial rule.
not adversarial. It's not.
Is
hold on, it's
that
not
kind of
supposed
like
to be
the public
adversarial.
advocate in New York
the other
City,
guy
who's like
Satan.
the mayor's public enemy?
No relation to IRL. IRL politics, as far as I know. There could be one that's accidental, but I'm unaware of it. Let's see. How do you deal with disputes when the GMs disagree? Video replay and live submit up. Roll it off. If you guys really want to put it down to like we are at an impasse, two people roll a d6.
No, but
Everyone
I
goes.
feel like I sympathize with I'm a huge advocate of not changing shit before you know what it is and how it works, and trying to run something as faithfully as possible in the beginning, so you know what you're innovating on. I love that, but just this idea
But everybody
that
thinks
there's
they know how it
DMs.
works, though, when they look at it. is the problem. Like, okay, remember that hollow that I showed you guys earlier? We had 3 druids in the party come into that hollow. They were the party out of a West Marches server, which includes monks and paladins, and I don't think we have any rangers, strangely enough, but fighters and wizards of all different stripes and shapes. But 3 druids walked into this nature-themed dungeon. So naturally, they were going to bypass a bunch of content. Somebody who was less experienced than me, somebody dumber than me, would look at this outlier of performance of extremely high-performing party members in a situation that they were uniquely prepared for and say, that's broken, that's overpowered, let me get rid of this. And thus strip away one of the few ways that they had to be relevant and would strip away what is the point of playing a class like that, which is to have this unique win condition that other classes don't have access to.
You yourself say that you have this knowledge, right? So
I've been designing for 8 years. I have been designing for D&D for 8 years. I have been designing longer than that. I have a unique insight into this that I do not expect other GMs to have, and frankly, that GMs do not have.
It's not that complicated, right? I mean, the general principles of it are not that complicated, right? That certain abilities are sort of necessary, particularly in OSR games, which are mechanically a lot less complex than at least, with all of these player options and abilities, I would say they're less complex than 5e.
Mm-hmm. Maybe a little bit, not by much. 5e is really not that complex to run. It's very few neutrally rules interactions that you're going to be running into.
Yeah, it's all player facing stuff is where the complications are in 5e.
It only appears complicated because, again, you don't have encyclopedic knowledge of all those character abilities. In reality, the vast majority of them are pretty simple. Once you get familiar with them, they start looking the same, from text to text.
This sort of idea of like players using a spell or an ability in an unfamiliar way to sort of short circuit the game. This has also been around for ages, and the way to approach that. I think the sort of approved method used to be, at least, that you don't. I guess it kind of varied with the time, but you would. Some people would say, and this is the least fun option, where you would just take it away, or you would say no way more often. But very often, it's too like as soon as the players figure something out and you've approved it. Well, you either have to find some sort of countermeasure, or if it really is, if you have made a ruling that's just broken beyond repair, then you might have to.
You have to go back on it.
Yeah, you have to say I made a mistake there. My bad. Right.
I'm talking about situations where the game is functioning as intended.
Yeah.
Who should be the best in a nature dungeon, which is composed of plants?
The guy who plays
druid
the
who
best.
can control plants.
Assuming
an equal player
the nature guy, that seems like a no-brainer. So I'm actually curious where you're seeing all these people doing this, because I very rarely. I don't see this as a sacred cow that you're slaughtering. You're not wrong.
I mean, I think it's contentious what he's saying with the two DMs. I agree with the first part. That's annoying. That's not a sacred cow. But the second one, the solution, I think is definitely a sacred cow. I'm horrified.
Because that's where this comes from. I think you just have one person who knows how the player abilities work, is invested in it, which is why I prefer them to be a player as well. So they could say, like, no, this is supposed to succeed in this way. I know how these abilities work. You're off running the same.
You're out of line, DM.
Yeah, you're running a bunch of different monster encounters over the course
in your lane.
Over the course of 20 rooms, you've noticed one spike in player lifespan and proficiency.
Ash, right? This your future, this utopian future that you're painting, this has already happened. you had the D20 system, probably the most complex version of D&D, at least in terms of just like probably crunch and mechanics as well, right? And so what you would get is you would get situations where the DM doesn't know the rules, and especially these builds, as well as the players. So you would get rules lawyered and whistled back by your players, right? If you would mess it up. I, of course, would not mess this up, but people would mess this up, right? And that's I've been on tables where that happens, and that is the most emasculating, humiliating thing, where the DM makes a rule and the player goes, actually, no, it's here, right? No, it should work like this, and then already the DM is sweating. Because really, he should have known this. This is not a good thing, I think. So this future,
okay. That example differs from this for a couple of reasons. One, because D20 is not a real game. It was a cognitive trap that wiped out a large number of people's brain cells in the early 2000s.
And also revitalized D&D.
In a bad way. It should have died. If D20 was some kind of dark ritual that...
So the meteor that killed off the dinosaurs, and 1,000 heartbreakers cried out in pain.
Yeah, so I think that situation, like, I get it. It can suck to be told, like, no, it works like this. But at the same time, this 2DM structure fixes the scenario you mentioned. Because it's not in opposition to you tell me it works like this. It's like, no, the DM is aware of the world layer stuff, or this referee is aware of the world layer stuff, the historian, if you will. And this other GM, referee, the advocate, if you will, is responsible for the player-facing side. This structure has not been made use of in games because often the solution to that sort of structure was, well, this looks too complicated, or I don't understand it, so I'm going to change this rule and go to homebrew it out. I'm going to get rid of it.
Well, the way I see it is, right, what you're describing is you would have the exact same situation. It's just that your player would also be legally empowered by the game to fuck you over. In fact, you would be hedged out of making... I don't even know how this would work, but you would be hedged out of making, I guess, the calls. No, wait, you would still make the calls, but the player-facing DM has the ability to veto your calls. Is that how this would work?
No, the player-facing, you would just look at the person who knows what the player abilities are and ask them, how does this work? Because to me, it is insane that you would not do that already. To like look at the rules lawyer and say, oh, this person knows how all the character abilities of the party works. They could probably play this. They're so good at the game that they could probably play this like Tyranny or Divinity Original Sin by themselves is how good they are with the party's abilities. It is insane to me that you wouldn't just, as a default, look to that person and say, all right, can you tell me how this ability works with this other thing? I think it works this way. And then just go along with the recommendation. Because why wouldn't I? I'm not here to... my masculinity does not depend upon the...
It's not about masculinity.
No,
right?
Because you mentioned... the supreme authority of my position at the head of the table.
No, it's being able to run a game. Yeah, you do need a certain amount of authority. It's not necessarily your masculinity that's at risk. But yeah, of course, like this idea where
the person who knows more than you and say, "Can you tell me how this works?"
You don't even know the game you're running.
We started this example with games that are getting increasingly more complex and have a higher level of detail. And so it is not practical for them to be aware of the intended, or is not practical for them to spend all their time on learning a vast number of player abilities when they could be making more content for those players to engage with.
But they would be making that content without being aware of like how the players would interact with it, right? Via their abilities.
Yes, a large number of challenges in dungeons, to bring it all the way back around, are asymmetrical. Something like a disease or a curse is not something you swing your sword at, right? It has to be solved through other means.
Right. But but then the point still stands, right? You definitely still need a working knowledge of how they operate.
Yes, like the core function of the game. You're going to, even if I was in a state where I didn't know how all the 5e character abilities work, or my character abilities work for stuff like secondary classes, I still know the broad language of them. I know that generally, I know what the timers are probably going to be by the time you start reading the ability to me. Okay, that's paralysis. It's probably going to end at they're probably going to have a save at the end of their next turn. It's probably going to last for a minute. They're probably going to have a save at the end of each of their turns. I know it the moment you start reading it to me. But again, I've been a designer for 8 years, and I've been soaking my head in this stuff constantly.
Wait, do you run a game? Do you currently run a game?
Yes.
Is there a player advocate DM?
No.
Okay, why not?
I'm running. I have. Wait. What do you mean? Why not? Fifth edition doesn't have that role.
Yeah, but you could implement that, right? And
I could implement a lot of things. Right now, I'm implementing
edition.
mass combat, exploration, diplomacy, downtime actions, harvesting rules, and more interesting monsters. I have not been paid. I have not been requested, nor have I been paid. Most importantly, to completely rewrite the entire system.
It seems to me like it wouldn't be that much of a rewrite.
Okay.
Well, but I mean, so I was about to say.
I think I just need to do it. I think I just need to release 3 games that have the structure, and by that time we could get over the weird arguments for again, a D20 has traumatized people with these weird rule lawyers. Like, no, you have to use the rules for this person falling on this other person in X game, like on page 35 of the DMG, you know? And I understand that that's an annoying experience.
It's no, but it is an annoying experience, but it's fixed by just the DM knowing his game a little bit better. And of course, right, there is a limit. At some point, your players will know their abilities a bit better than you do. But, well, then you defer to them. But you don't have to codify that. And I mean, as long as you don't say, well, that's horrifically overpowered, or I'm going to strip that out entirely, which was the initial impetus for this, right?
Which people do. Like, yes, they could not do that, but they are not doing that. So my natural instinct is to say, okay, is there a way in which I could codify this into technical writing? And it seems like codifying, not just in the rules themselves, but again, in the player culture, that there are people responsible for running the world, and there are people responsible for adjudicating player abilities, seems like a natural. It seems like you would have, this is just the caller role, except with a little bit more authority over adjudication.
Well, it's that authority, right? That's where it kind of gets complicated. Because as a DM, you are supposed to make most of the calls of what happens, but now you've got an extra little barrier there who is a player.
But you're no longer a DM in this paradigm. You're no longer a DM. You are the person who runs.
Advantage.
Right. You are the person. Yeah, they could, but you could just fire back with stronger monsters or more powerful whatever. You both have incentives to not engage. You haven't gotten rid of the incentives to not be a dick to each other. You've just been given one more incentive on the player side to just not act like a dick. And a little bit of the authority to act like a dick has been taken away, yes. But you didn't need that to run a game. You didn't need to be able to say, Speak with Plants is so broken because it let us get past these 2 hallways in order to run a nature-themed dungeon. I didn't need that at the very least. I could just run the player-themed dungeon, right? I'm still able to place down monsters. I'm still able to put traps and diseases and curses throughout the dungeon and sprinkle monsters that might be of help to the party or might not be, people for them to rescue and stuff like that. None of my ability to do that is in any way impacted by people, by my now inability to say I'm getting rid of that spell because it had a unique, rare, but potent spike in player effectiveness, or produced that spike in player effectiveness, you know?
I'm so my biggest issue is partiality being a concern. Um, so just to give a more specific example, let's say that you have a situation where the players want to use, and you're running a 5th edition game, they want to use was it woodland, not call woodland beings, so it's the thing where you can summon pixies, right? You can summon pixies, and I think you actually get to choose in 5th edition what creature as long as it's within a certain hit die range, right?
So you do not get to choose. You do not get to choose. However, it is common in the context of the player culture for DMs to let their players choose, because it has been because forcing you in the middle of the session or in the middle of combat, no less, to open up your monster manual and start flipping through a rather crappy selection of monsters is tedious.
So it wasn't the pixie one. I was thinking of just whenever they're able to summon like so many small creatures where they're controlling 24 wolves or something like that.
Oh,
Nice. Summon nature's ally or something. Call animals.
And so that my contestation there would be that the DM would get to a point where they would say, look, that's just too cumbersome on like the progress of the game for us to do that.
Already chugging, yeah.
and then you have the player advocate saying, well, but we need to win this fight, and this is what the rule says. This is how it's supposed to work. Because I know that for me, the way that I would rule that as the DM is I would say, I would impose limits where it's like, okay, you can get up to 4 creatures total, and then they can be up to the CR that you get. So if you're going to get like one giant creature that's all the highest CR possible, that's fine. But if you're going to spread the love, and it would be just because it would bog down the game too much.
And
okay, so I'm in the advocate. Hold on. Let's play out this example. I'm in the advocate role. I say, okay, so he's going to summon 8 wolves. There's 16 enemies on the board here. Could we just had these 8 wolves overtake and basically let us ignore, say, 4 of your monsters on the board, so that he's still able to use his ability and the spell, because this is the intended power of the spell. It basically lets us we make more monsters, or we make more creatures, allied creatures on the board, so we're able to ignore sections of the combat. Can we preserve the use of this spell, or let's preserve the use of this spell by while speeding up the combat to begin with, because that's apparently the issue.
And then Aaron says no, and then you say, well, I overrule you. And then that happens.
Sounds like a very interesting and productive dialogue.
Okay.
It was. So the combat has now been made to run faster. The player's ability has remained intact. He is aware that he is still playing a game, that he can rely on the rules in some way to produce an experience, and is not just waiting for some Mother May-I to constantly affirm his ability to progress in the game, and constantly has to wait for the Eye of Sauron to scour over his character sheet to see if he's allowed to play now. This has been a productive
You do a call, and then it's my character abilities say this. No.
I like that idea. If the player advocate presented that to me, what I would probably say is, I would compare, the relative combat abilities of the wolves and the things that they're fighting, come up with a percentage chance for, are they going to win the fight or are they going to lose the fight? And then just roll that. And then that resolves over the next few rounds. So it's like that way.
Something like,
but also as a DM, right? You make that call where if you notice that whatever this game is getting bogged down, I'm bombing, oh dear, right? I mean, you need to be able to make that call, okay, listen, I'm gonna maybe cut this short or whatever, right?
But that wasn't his first instinct. His first instinct was to get rid of the spell.
Not to get rid of the spell, but to restrict. Restrict it a little bit.
My point remains intact, regardless of the specification. Okay.
Yes, that would require, though, that the player advocate would be able to think in terms of that kind of problem
solving. What if it was just a player suggestion? You're still the DM. You get to make the call. It's just the player was like, hey, wait a minute.
the way that
then
I
you
run,
would consider it, right?
yeah,
And then you
people
would
people
say,
would
"That's
know
a
that
good point."
I'm generally open to a lot of things, but I mean, they're depending on the kind of game we're playing and everything. I may be a little bit more strict. It just kind of depends. In a 5e game, you know, I tend to be really open. Period. But yeah, I mean, so I feel like that's just something players should be able to do. But I think that there is some kind of power in just expressing that that's like a job that, you know, they should do, is, you know, to
We had
advocate.
callers in the old games. One person that says, like, all right, we're going to do this, right?
Yes, that's for large groups. I've used callers
Yes.
in my Carcosa game.
I know. I was, or in the you did it in the BX game.
Oh yeah. When we had
I was my
yeah,
first session.
correct.
I was a caller.
Yeah, true.
Because
true,
we had to
true.
move people along. So again, it's just, and that person's job is to know the character abilities to some extent, to know what everybody would probably be doing, and to basically lay it out in front of you. They don't have absolute authority over the rest of the party. It's negotiated, right? They say it's, but their voice has been secured as this is up top. This is what we're listening to first. If you would like to, if you don't want to do this, you have to disagree. And so the advocate's purpose in this case is to just say, this is how the character abilities are going to go. You're on an equal footing with this other person who, again, doesn't know how these things work perfectly, is not aware of the design or how it's supposed to go. The player advocate is in a position to say, this person hasn't done anything all session. They have finally come across a combat encounter in which they can be, in which they can have a spike in performance by casting this spell that summons 8 wolves, right? You're noticing it as an outlier, because you're on the other side of the screen. I'm noticing it as this person finally has a chance to be a little bit more productive than they normally are, but it's outside the range of their normal scope of play. Just preserve it. If it's going to slow down the game, we'll just do it. But people are used to not speaking up, again, because it's this interpretation of this person is simultaneously running the world, running the players, and running the design
I don't know
all at the same time.
Players are like. I'm actually pretty used to players are constantly trying to advocate that they can do things or that things work. They would protest if you restrict some sort of attempt to do anything, right?
Some do, yes.
But the ones that don't, isn't that just also like a factor of like learning the game? Do you need I mean, once again, a caller is great for just sort of coordinating and giving somebody it just simplifies everything, right? And you don't have to go, yeah, of course, right?
You don't have to go through each and every individual objection to what people might want to do in the given game. You could just give it to one person and let the dissent serve for individual choices. I don't like mechanics that just rely on people being as disagreeable as me.
No, but this is I like, once again, this idea of DMs limiting, you know, the player ability. I think this is widely considered to be bad practice. I don't know what 5e looks like. Maybe it's necessary.
It's not widely considered to be bad practice.
In the OSR, absolutely.
In the OSR in particular, people have been stripping out rules that they dislike for the past 50 years and produced Frankenstein's Frankenstein's monsters.
But that's their own game. As soon as you go into a game and these house rules are known beforehand, you can't really protest, right? That's known beforehand.
So we have already figured out what the runaround is going to be for something like a player advocate, which is you're just going to state beforehand what the house rules are. I don't like this, or this, or this, because the play culture dictates that you could just get rid of a bunch of rules that are critical to the game functioning as intended. And because I've stated them beforehand as opposed to in play, now they are good and fine. Now you have willingly subjected yourself. Something
people
shitty.
can leave games, right? This does happen.
Can.
And having an advocate here, once again, if you don't know a certain rule, you can defer to a player with like maybe senior experience, that sort of stuff. That's fine.
Right.
It-
Why let the
I'm
system
just-
automate what
I
the
can't-
GM could
like,
forget to do
it's just,
themselves? Is what we're saying.
I can't really see why you would want to ever codify, or really like split up the role of a DM, which probably works fine.
I would rather the system automate what the GM could forget to do themselves. Yes. I'm not relying on this imperfect. If you're going to play, I run the players, I run the game, and I run the design. Yes, I would rather split that role, especially for its impacts on the play culture. I want the understanding to be the default is the game. You can look at the rules, and I don't have the excuse of people just house ruling out bad content, nor does the GM have the excuse of there's bad content in these rules.
We'll have to
fuck
see it
with
in
everything.
we'll have to see it in practice, right?
Yes, like I said, I just have to release 3 or 4 games that do this.
Well,
I think it does match a Secret Cow based on our discussion.
Yeah, it does. It does.
That
And,
is a sacred cow.
well, Prince, do you have one?
Really not that many. I don't really have this thing where I hate using certain rules.
Mhm.
But once again, I play a pretty like BX is not very complex. I port in some rules from AD&D to make it run a little bit more smoothly, and to clamp down on the fatalities a little bit. I still think death at 0 hit points is not that good. But really, just these sacred cows, not really. Most of the rules and procedures that I hate or developments are like new. I don't like I don't like deviations from the original game so much. There's a few additional rules that I enjoyed. Axe, for example, is a good example of a like a modern retro clone that I really liked. But I would say no. I probably don't have a sacred cow to slaughter. XP limits for demi-humans. Keep them in. Why? They're perfectly fine.
I think everybody here is actually good on EXP limits for demi-humans, or like level limits for demi-humans.
Yeah.
I do it differently in the games that I design, but the principle is I'm still in favor of the principle, which is that the demi-humans represent a different way to engage with the game that's maybe a little bit easier, a little bit more difficult, or lets you bypass certain encounters, as you should be allowed to do. That's why they exist. You're supposed to have a large roster of characters, and some of those are supposed to be easier to play than others. And demi-humans make sure that the XP limits make sure that the ones that are especially easier to play than others are not necessarily you don't get to prioritize them across the entire course of your play in the campaign, right? They have to have an endpoint that falls before something like your human does, right?
Yeah. The more I think about it, it's not sacred cow isn't really what I have. It's more just like things that exist in other games. That
Do
I
you
don't
want
like.
3 DMs per chance? No, but so you don't have any sacred cows either, Aaron.
Yeah, not really. I mean, so
What
I
about
guess you could
speed
say
factor?
okay.
What about
so
weapons versus armor class tables?
Yeah. So, but those aren't things that I necessarily hate. Like there are things that I don't want to implement as written necessarily. Now, I mean, I've had a lot of discussions with a lot of people about all that stuff, and almost all of it boils down to if you just use it, you'll get used to it, and it'll be second nature, and it works like it's supposed to, and it's good.
And
Basically, Go ahead.
Oh, sorry. I'll let you finish first before I make my I add something to that.
Yeah. So, like for instance, for weapon versus armor class, I like the idea. I love the idea. I just want it a little simpler, rather than having like the whole big table. The way that I've seen it used, that's a lot simpler. It's just like one like two like three little values attached to the weapons. You know, this weapon it works this well against like this general class of armor, this well against this general class of armor, this well
Yeah,
against
that's
this general.
how 2E used to do it.
Yeah.
I play what is it? It's called Seven Voyages of Zilarthan with Milan as a DM, and they use weapons versus armor class tables. It's mainly just something that you write down on your character sheet near the weapon, and then you roll. Right, you kind of get used to it, but it is a little bit. It can be a little bit awkward. No, I was going to remark, with AD&D 1E, Settembrini had an interpretation. You had there's a thing where you have random targeting, right? If you're in a complex melee,
Mhm.
you can't target. It's not even that you can't target ranged attacks. You actually also shouldn't be able to target melee attacks.
Yeah. Right.
Right. But then there's also all these pretty complicated rules about facing, how many characters can attack you at the same time. There's all these hexes around it. I think his interpretation was that essentially this was kind of like an either-or situation. So you would either use this more precise positioning in certain circumstances, or if it's a big chaotic brawl, you would do whatever the random targeting rules, right? They seemed almost incongruent. I don't know if this is a correct interpretation or not, but it seemed to make sense to me.
I feel like that's fair. I feel like there should be a distinction between, you know, your melees that are just, you know, like maybe you got three bad guys and three good guys. You know, it's like, then, you know, why am I worried about random whenever it comes to, you know, like we've got a line of like 10 or so, 10 versus 10. Then that's whenever I'm like, okay, I could see where maybe you end up, you know, getting caught up in a scuffle with somebody that you didn't predict. I am curious, do they re-randomize it every single round, or do they continue like, oh, you're engaged with this person, for you to go and deal with somebody else, and you're gonna have to, like, you know, withdraw.
Well, they do state if you intelligent opponents might possibly single out a particular opponent, and then they're locked in melee with that guy, right?
Mhm.
But for the rest, I guess it's random targeting. It's a little. I think this is I'm not sure what the if there's a consistent interpretation for this.
I mean, it does clamp down on one thing that I absolutely do hate, and that is everybody all gang up on that one guy until that one's down, and then we're gonna go all gang up on that guy.
And if you do the same, then you're immediately an asshole. I mean, as a DM, then you can just go, oh, okay, now they go for you again, my friend. Yeah.
Dungeons should have more than 20 rooms. It's a DCC sacred cow.
That's probably an artifact of the tournament format.
Tournament format, and they all have those like one-page maps that they try to make artistic looking. So it might have something to do with it too.
I mean, for sure, but yeah, it's also like something that's made to be played in so much as a single setting. I like EOTB's interpretation as well. The idea that you randomize you randomize among all the squares that are facing the attacker. That would probably solve it. Yeah, then you would still get to use whatever getting hit from the flank where your shield is not. You wouldn't be able to use your shield. All of this other like facing and that sort of shit.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, I mean, it has there's a method to the madness, and you know, it makes sense, and I feel like the output would be good, in that it would emulate the kind of the chaos of combat, especially when you're dealing with 1 minute rounds rather than, you know, just like, oh, this is one very brief exchange and then one very brief exchange. It's just it's a bit of work is the only thing. Just a little bit of work, because then you're having to Yeah, you're having a it's a little bit more difficult for people, especially if they're doing like theater of the mind. But I feel like with 1E, theater of the mind might not be the best way to go. I don't know. PX feels stupid without missiles into
Correct.
melee rules.
I use that rule as well. You can't. I use the 80 in the interpretation of firing into melee. Before that, I had I had a rule about what rank you could fire from and what kind of penalty. It ended up being too complicated. I just use fire into melee rules now, and it works. It works fine.
Mm-hmm.
Boys, I gotta head out. Prince, I appreciate you arguing the counter earlier. It was nice chatting with all of you. I'll see you folks
Oh, of
later.
course. Hell yeah. Talk to you later, dude.
Peace.
Actually, I think I'm going to be heading out pretty soon too.
That's 4.
Anything else? Any last parting words of wisdom or anything like that, guys?
Words of wisdom. I think we it was overall, it was pretty good. I think we probably could have delved a little bit deeper into the well, I mean, dungeon design. We've looked at maps now, right? But probably also, how you're going to stock them, how you use creatures, how you use treasure, weird items, maybe use vaults of treasure, right? Treasure placement, trickery, that sort of stuff. I think that's something that is maybe worth revisiting at a later time.
Heck yeah.
But no words of wisdom from me.
Yeah, no wisdom here. Sorry.
We have no wisdom.
There's a recommendation by Mr. Goose. Put Heroic Legendarium on the NAP2 Best of OSR books.
Heroic Legendarium.
I think it's just as an addition to Advanced Dungeons and Dragons. I think it's like phenomenal. Somebody did Unearthed Arcana.
I've never actually heard
better, less shitty, and it's just I don't know. It kind of struck me as just a very inspiring example of like what an OSR a product could be. That somebody who's genuinely tried to like sort of understand a certain game.
I'm looking it up, and this has been out for like 2 years now.
Oh yeah.
So yeah, character class notes: Mystic, Hunter, Savant, Mountebank. Character race.
I'll give you a more detailed answer later on in the Discord.
Yeah, that would be nice.
All right. Well, thank you guys for joining us. We will definitely have to do. I'll actually subtitle this one the map one. So that way people know that we're mostly just going into layout of just the map composition and things like that. And then later on in the future we can do stuff more about like the monsters and the treasure and all that kind of distributions and traps and all that. So that's a good idea, Prince. I don't know why I didn't think of it.
I'm glad. Mimetic kill agents to my local pond. I will write a review. I promise. I think we'll have a great time. And thanks for sharing your work, by the way, Aaron.
It's it would immediately came to mind when I was trying to think of what's something that I've seen that's bad. How about something I did?
I haven't you haven't sent it to me, so I haven't reviewed it. It was probably fun. Who knows? We'll see.
It's a legitimate question.
Who is Goose? Yeah, everybody.
Yeah, let's dox and kill Goose. Whoa. Oops.
Just about.
in a campaign, in a Greyhawk campaign.
Yes, in a Greyhawk campaign. Yep. The giant goose is now an NPC.
Right. I meant an actual giant goose. Jeez. No, we'll talk later. I'll definitely write a review for sure.
All right. Peace out, everybody.
Hell yeah.
Bye.
Later.